We're talking about clean tech, the startup scene around clean tech for tackling the climate change. You're the Secretary General of the European Roundtable of Industrialists. How much of your time do you actually use for this issue? Is it like 10%, 20%? Is it what this theme is 100% of your taking your time? Just wondering how much is this part of your daily work?
For this year, we are launching 3 flagships.
Okay.
One is, let's say, on the digital transformation. Another one is on skills.
Yep.
And the third one is on the Green Deal.
Okay.
And actually, I had the chairman of our committee at noon on the phone, and I said, the Green Deal paper and our, messages and our event is the most important thing we will do this year.
So it sounds like you're quite busy with it.
Correct. I think at least 20%, 25% of my time.
Yeah, excellent. Can you tell me something about how do you position these projects? So where do you start creating the right people or the right themes when it comes to the skills or, for instance, the Green Deal? Let's start with skills. We can later go on with the dynamics also around the European Commission. Let's start with such a skills project. Can you tell me how you start up something like this within the roundtable?
Well, for example, around skills, a lot is happening. But so we have identified within Europe 200 projects.
Yep.
Not only, let's say, that people, not only the training, but actually the end-to-end ownership, and to make sure that there's training is linked to a job.
Yep.
And to see whether skills were also cross-industry and cross-country. And unfortunately, there were not that many successful projects who also, measured their success in terms of end-to-end ownership, cross-industry. So we developed a platform, we developed a proposal, we've shared these practices with Commissioner Schmid, with Commissioner Breton, because we provided the numbers, the current, but also the future workforce. There's a lot of upskilling and reskilling needs to be done,
yep.
Especially also in the field of green and digital.
Yep.
And our companies are also offering to open up their resources for non-employees.
This is really
companies are not, they're big companies, BMW, Shell, BP, Nokia, Ericsson. They invest tons into their own staff.
They do.
And they're not asking for money from governments, but they're willing to offer their support and their knowledge on labor market and on skills, let's say, to the better of society.
And can we be a bit more concrete? Because we hear that when it comes to climate change, if we want to get it done, we need the right people with the right skills, which is going to be an issue. Then what would be interesting in your project, what kind of skills are we talking about? What do people and professionals need to learn to be part of the change that we want concerning climate change?
Well, I think that's too broad.
Yep.
It depends on the specific industry, specific jobs. It's being able to learn. Clearly, let's say the digital skills are very important. I think one of the key messages we are trying to get across also in Brussels is that there's a lot of, let's say, support and positivity for the Green Deal.
Yep.
Rightly so. But Green Deal, people feel the importance of the Green Deal in their hearts, but the digital deal need to have, let's say, as much as support and passion, but that's too much in people's minds.
Yep.
But the Green Deal will not fly without digital transformation of Europe. And unfortunately, it's an area where Europe truly is lacking.
So okay. So this is a very important point you make, that these two are combined or connected. If we don't get the thing done, then otherwise the whole Green Deal is going to be a very tough project.
Correct. And if you, for example, looked, we published numbers on the rollout of 5G.
Yep.
And some people think that 5G is the main cause for Corona. I tend to disagree.
Luckily, most people.
Some people believe in conspiracies. The truth is that 5G is crucial for the industry for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Companies are depending on software, the fastest connections. The Boeing problems with the Boeing airplanes was probably due to software issues.
Yeah.
And to make sure that all your devices, the Internet of Things, that everything is connected, you need 5G. So 5G is not faster Netflix on your iPhone. 5G is the factory of the future.
Yeah.
If you then look at the rollout of 5G base stations in Europe towards South Korea or the US or China, we're way behind, 200-300 times slower and less, let's say, base stations. And also within Europe, there's a big difference between the various member states. And why is it also so important? Siemens, they have the choice to build their next plant in South Korea or in the US.
Sure.
And many of our member companies prefer to invest in Europe.
Yeah.
But they have a choice. But the SMEs, the suppliers to these multinationals, the Mittelstand, auf Deutsch,
yeah.
they don't have that choice. So the 5G agenda is crucial also for the smaller companies, for the startups.
Okay, that's clear. You also mentioned when your skills project that the companies you represent also try to make sure that other people benefited, not only their employees but also non-employees. Let's make the jump then to the role your companies can play in the startup scene. How can you also, when you believe, as you're doing with the skills project, how can you also make sure that the connection is being made between the startup scene and the big companies to actually enhance and accelerate the change we need when it comes to clean tech?
Yeah, and so I'm glad that you're asking the question, how they benefit from each other, because in the past, sometimes there was political debate, is it are multinational companies more important, or SMEs more important, or startups more important? And of course, the answer is you need all of them. You need an ecosystem. Small companies benefit from big companies. Big companies cannot benefit from, let's say, cannot grow without, let's say, operating in an ecosystem of smaller companies and startups.
Yep.
Startups often, let's say, have more focus, take more risk, have more failures. Big companies can scale up.
Yep.
Can take their product or their innovations to a global market. You often see that big companies also have their own venture capital department, and they participate in additional startups. Because it's easier to develop something new, sometimes outside of a larger company because of the internal bureaucracy or the risk aversion. So it's spotting talent, it's trying to grow. Often smaller companies really, let's say, accelerate their growth once they have a buyer, let's say a client, who is stable. So if you're able to sell your products to Shell, you're really in business.
Yeah. So how can we create more incentives that this collaboration, this ecosystem is actually being created? Of course, we're doing it, but how can we fasten the pace to actually make sure that these ecosystems can create the impact what we're looking for?
Well, then talking about Europe, then there are some real challenges. One of the challenges is the lack of funding, especially equity. But also a lot of companies are still too dependent on bank financing. So we need to develop and deepen European capital markets. And that's something, it sounds a bit boring, but in order to do so, in order to, let's say, have a European corporate bond market, you need to make sure that in 27 member states, the ministers of justice agree on some standards on the bankruptcy law.
Yeah.
Well, that's nitty gritty, but also important work. It's also important to strengthen the internal market. I still remember I was Minister for Trade in the Netherlands between 2007 and 2010, and TomTom was at that time really, really booming. And I ran into Harold Godijn, the founder and still the CEO.
Yep.
And I said, how can I be of help? And because I'm doing a lot of trade promotions and trade negotiations, and he said, let me think. Well, I have a request, Frank. Can you please make sure that we will have one standard and one language in Europe? Because that's great to work with 400 million consumers.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, Frank, TomTom, you might not know, but TomTom I'm competing with Google and Apple, 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
So it's that internal market which we need to deepen and to strengthen. And then again, it's also, still a lot of stuff is going digitally, but it's still also, events like you're organizing right now is bringing young entrepreneurs, in connection with the CEOs. And maybe one final thing is, but that's maybe also European, and that's a message also for the startups. 20 million euros in terms of, let's say, your personal wealth, if you reach that limit, it's not good enough. A lot of people, by the way, then quit in the Netherlands because you can have a wonderful life with 20 million euros. But we also need a few of these Jeff Bezos, the Bill Gates, who go up to, billions and maybe even 100 billion. And unfortunately, because they are also the big investors of the future. Yep. So, and I'm saying this because the 20 million, of course, is extremely a lot of money, but it's really scaling up companies from, let's say, a national hero to a European champion, but Europe needs to have more global champions. If you look,
okay, it's a clear message, Frank. We're out of time, but I take to heart what you were mentioning when it comes to this way of thinking, this approach, but also the importance of the ecosystems. Thanks so much, Frank Heemskerk.
You're welcome.